Welcome to Sacramento State, to our ongoing Doctorate in Educational Leadership Brown Bag series. Please check out our past brown bags on our YouTube page, the Sacramento State Doctorate in Educational Leadership YouTube page. So welcome to all of you that are here and to you that are watching this presentation around the world and around the United States. So today we're so very fortunate to have a colleague from another California state system campus. Dr. Jamal Cooks is at San Francisco State University, and he is actually the Associate Director of their Doctorate in Educational Leadership. So we're very fortunate to have him make the trip up here today. Now, he is going to talk today about challenges and issues related to incarcerated youth. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce the Associate Director of the San Francisco State Doctorate in Educational Leadership, Dr. Jamal Cooks. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for that great introduction. And I'm really, really excited to talk about this work. Just as a quick background, I'm originally from Oakland, California. Grew up in East Oakland, kind of a tough neighborhood growing up, and so I've been very familiar with youth and incarceration for quite a while, because a lot of my friends and associates were already going in and out of the system at that time. I grew up going through public school systems, and from there went to, some people may know, Skyline High School in Oakland, and then on to UC Berkeley. I got involved with education by working with after-school tutorial programs and mentoring, tutoring pieces. And at the very end of college, ended up deciding to go into teaching. I worked at a school called King of States Junior High School. I affectionately say that we were racing to the bottom to be one of the worst junior high schools at the time when I was hired. It was very, very tough. Bomb threats, gang fights, smoking, drinking. This was all at the junior high school level. We did a lot of creative, innovative things to be able to shift that culture and to be able to move on an upward trend, like learning communities. We had houses. It became more themed in terms of the curriculum and the instruction. And so from those experiences, I thought that was a really good thing. I ended up going to the University of Michigan for a master's in social studies, curriculum development, and also there it is, go blue. And we did great in the tournament. Oh, yeah. We did great in the tournament.
I was there.
You should have told me. But ended up going in a master's program for curriculum development, and then stayed on for the PhD in language literacy and culture. My work, I then went to San Francisco State. My research looks at popular culture in the classroom as a teaching tool, working with urban students, professional development with teachers, building expository writing skills, and also sports literacy. And sports literacy is an important piece because when I came back from Michigan and back to California, I ended up becoming a track coach. So I've been a youth and a high school track coach for the last 18 years in parallel with my academic career as well. I always think that that's important to note because, yes, I can read a lot. Yes, I can write a lot. But if I'm not working with kids, students, families, and communities, then for me, I feel disconnected. And so that's why I've continued to do that work. This particular project is kind of comes out of that. And matriculating through the process of becoming, getting tenure at San Francisco State, and then more recently, the last couple of years, becoming a full professor, I kind of sat back and said, you know what, yeah, I do the literacy stuff, yeah, I do the work, but I want to do some work that's going to really last, some other kind of work. And so I was introduced into this particular project. And so what I'm going to do is talk to you about a problem, talk to you a little bit about relevant literature, background of the program. I'm really excited about the program that I'm going to talk to you about. And if we have time, which I hope, I will be able to give you kind of some researcher reflections in doing this work. And I'll share why in a moment. So, a problem. Growing up, I can say that I thought that there were 5 options in life. Well, actually, I thought there were 4, and then I kind of was introduced into a 5th one. I thought that because everyone around in my neighborhood sold drugs, you could rap, be a musician, you could be an athlete. At the time in junior high school, I was probably 5'7", 120-something pounds, dripping wet with a rock. So I was not very big, right? So athletics may not have been my piece. My dad was in the military for 23 years. He was in the Air Force. And growing up, I wanted to do nothing that my father did. So going to the military was not an option. And college was a distant 5th option for me, right? So after trying rapping, after trying sports and doing these different things, knowing I wasn't going to go into the military, that's when I began to say, you know what, maybe college is something that I can end up doing. But for many youth, they kind of may have stuck into those same kinds of preconceived ideas about what they could and could not do. So we have youth of color are disproportionate in the juvenile justice system, right? What's interesting to me is that 82% of the youth that are incarcerated are folks of color. The interesting piece to me in terms of being a language and literacy specialist is that the reading scores for these students is abysmal. That basically what these statistics are saying is that if a student is not able to read and write at a 4th grade level, basic literacy skills, that becomes a marker for who's becoming incarcerated and who's not. So that also points to the types of schools that we have, the type of public schools that we have. So if the poorer neighborhoods have the schools with maybe more inexperienced teachers, maybe fewer resources, then the problem becomes then the educational experience that they're getting may not be to the same level as others. And if that happens, when these kids leave school, where else are they going to go? What are they going to do? There's not very many other options, right? So then many of them, some of them, go to a life of crime in the streets, right? So when we look at this, the problem is multi-layered, right? Students are disengaged in public schools. As a teacher of teachers, I constantly have this conversation about discipline. And the new teacher says, hey, you know what? These kids and those kids, because some folks use terms like that, those kids and these kids and that family. Okay, well, who are you really talking about? And why are you referring to them in that particular way, right? Because my point is that if there's an issue going on in your class, as a teacher, you're in charge of your class. So my question back to them is, well, what are you doing in terms of curriculum? What are you doing in terms of instruction? Are you getting them engaged in your class? Are you creating innovative and creative ways to learn the content, no matter what the content is? Are you playing games? Are you doing activities? Are you using videos? Are you using technology? What are you doing? Because that's all that you as a teacher can control. But pointing the finger at those kids and they're not doing this and that, that's not productive, right? So students are disengaged in public schools. Disproportionate discipline practices, right? Zero tolerance policies. Can anyone tell us what a zero tolerance policy is in schools?
If you find guns, then you are suspended.
If you find guns, you are suspended, right? The idea is that if you usually, in many cases, and I can say this from what I remember and as a teacher and as a student, something happens, pencil drops, piece of paper is thrown, maybe get a referral, I don't know what they call them now, a pass or whatever. You go see the counselor, you go see the principal, whoever that might be. They talk to you, and they would actually counsel you, like, hey, what's going on today? How are you feeling? That was easier to do when there was one counselor to maybe a couple hundred kids, 100, 150 kids. Today, unfortunately, many times counselors end up becoming high-priced data entry because they have 500 kids, 600 kids. A school of 2,000, 2,100 kids may only have four counselors. So there's no time to counsel. There's no time to talk. There's no time to figure out what's going on. And that's not the counselor's fault, right? That's part of the structure and organization in which they're working in. School to prison pipeline. These all lead into the school to prison pipeline, right? And the school to prison pipeline is a very interesting piece. And as educators, we have to think about, well, how are we contributing to this school to prison pipeline? Now, a lot of teachers and educators will say, well, I don't contribute to it. I'm here to help. I'm working with the kids. Yeah. But there's this little thing called implicit bias, right? This little thing called implicit bias where if we're not very reflective and very understanding and able to identify what our biases are in working with students, whether that's based on race, class, gender, right? Anything to do with our social class, right? Our politics. If we're not aware of those things in terms of our biases, then we may be in some sense contributing to the school to prison pipeline because of how we teach, because of the curriculum that we pick, because of the type of instruction that we choose to do, right? And also in terms of discipline policies and practices that we follow. So the lack of programs and resources focused on rehabilitation for youth, particularly while they're incarcerated, is a major problem. Is a major, major problem. I would say maybe 20 years ago, juvenile halls were seen as places where kids were just kind of thrown, and the numbers were very, very high when they were locked up, when they were incarcerated. And sometimes there were physical consequences, emotional, verbal consequences for the students when they were for the young people when they were incarcerated, right? There's been a shift in that model, right? There's been a shift in that model, and it's been based off of talking about rehabilitation, right? But it ends up being just verbiage. Although some of the physical consequences may not happen as often for youth that are incarcerated, there is still a lot of emotional and verbal pieces that are not as very positive for the students. And if we're talking about rehabilitation, if they have a felony, right, what are they going to come out and do? So are you providing them skills to go into jobs that they can get when they get out? A handful are, but many are not. All right? Did your hand go up? Oh, no, that's like. So, research questions. So what are the educational experiences of incarcerated youth inside and outside of the juvenile facility? Right? This was my initial research question. Along with, what are strategies to help limit recidivism for youth offenders? Right? And so what's recidivism? We don't want them coming back. Recidivism is, how do we stop that cycle? How do we close the door on them, on these youth returning back? Right? So a third question that's not listed, but one that kind of emerged is, how can language and literacy development help or assist incarcerated youth in processing their current situation? Right? So what began to happen is, yes, we have relevant literature. We can have all kinds of different conversations about the relevant literature, but the basic piece is that prison schools reinforce the existing educational inequities, right? What ends up happening is that the students can take these credits, these classes, and they can, which is basically like some continuation schools or anything else, but they may take packets, right? They're packets, and if they finish them and they get a certain percentage right, then they move on, right? But where is the interactive process of the teaching and learning? Where are the teachers completely focusing on building critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, right? Where do we get out of just giving a pamphlet or a booklet and then taking it back and then giving them credit, right? So when we talk about focusing on academic interventions, we found that that reduces recidivism. It gives them something else to be able to focus their attention on, right? Think about it. If we all were here, locked in this room, 5, 10, 15, 18 hours a day, I could be wrong. But all of us may not like each other by the end of the day. Just a hunch. Not sure how that would work, but I can just imagine that if that were the case, there may be some situations, some incidents, some conversations, some arguments, right? Now just multiply that times 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, right? So, what I've also found is that these students are very, 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 very bright because they've had to be bright. They've had to learn how to read, right, literacy, read people. They've had to learn how to read situations because if they read it wrong, that can mean death for them. That can mean bodily harm for them. That can mean going to jail for them, right? So a program that I began to work with is called I'm calling it the ABC program, right? I'm in the middle of writing this article, so I was spending less time on the acronyms. So this is the ABC program. It is a rites of passage program that started at a church and worked with the young men in that church, right? And they focused on these 6 pillars, right? Very, very simple, but very important. The church, once they went through all the students, all the young men at the church, I believe that some of the participants spoke so highly of it, and word got to the juvenile justice system that there was this rites of passage program. So then they invited them to come in. And I think there was very little seedling, right? But they go in and they start just doing the work, doing the rites of passage program. And once they began to do the rites of passage program, then they got a county grant to stay for a certain number of years, okay? I was asked to work with this particular program. In a couple of capacities. The first capacity was there's a CARES grant that basically talks about healing circles and mental and emotional wellness. And so what was interesting was that I was asked to become part of this mentoring circles. And in the mentoring circles, there's one facilitator, maybe 2, and they have a topic. So maybe the topic is, we're going to talk about integrity tonight, right? They had community partners that came in to support these conversations. So what ended up happening was that sometimes you may have a plan, but it would quickly go awry sometimes. Because what if you just found out your court date got pushed back? She might not be in a very good mood. She may not want to really talk, right? What if he finds out that someone was murdered in his family or his neighborhood or his clique? He's not going to be in a very good mood. Is everybody kind of with me? So what happened was that every Wednesday we would go in and not be really sure what the climate was going to be. Didn't know if there was fights that happened earlier that day. So basically, it was basically working with the emotional management of these young boys, and while still trying to get across to them information about those different topics. So, after doing that for a few weeks, I was asked to work with the XYZ program. The XYZ program was working with young men who completed, remember I was saying that they could take those worksheets, those pamphlets, those packets, and get finished? Well, you had a group of students that were finished with high school in terms of units, but were too young, they were young, not old enough to take the GED, but they were like maybe 16 and a half, 17, and while everyone else went to high school, yes, court school, what do? Sit from 9 to 3 till everybody else comes back. So the XYZ program asked community-based organizations and community partners to come in and do classes. Do classes for that small group of students. So I developed a writing program for incarcerated youth called the WELD program. And this was very deliberate to call it WELD, right? Writing everyday life for lifelong learning program, right? And so basically what I wanted to do was to use literacy, particularly writing, as a way to become reflective, as a way to better understand their situation and their emotions, and ultimately to begin the healing process for some of these young men. Okay? So it was a 6-week course, 90-minute classes. They wrote in journals, and they actually kept their journals, which was pretty cool, because they usually just leave stuff. So reflective journals, worksheets, classroom reflections. The only thing on here I did not get a chance to formally do were the interviews. Okay, and I'll tell you why. This is a population that is vulnerable. So I couldn't take pictures, right? Researchers in here, right? I'm going through qualitative methods 101, right? I couldn't take pictures. I couldn't bring in a recorder. I had to, if I gave pencils out, I had to collect the pencils right back and put them back, right? The only thing that they could bring was the journal. I couldn't bring my cell phone into the building, not the room, into the building. Are you all kind of with me? Right? So this was a very for trying to collect data, this was not the most convenient way to do it. So a lot of what I had to do was as soon as I left out, I would go to the car, stay in the parking lot, and just start writing. Or if we were in class, I would just, while they were doing their free writes or something, I'm taking notes on what just happened for 10 or 15 minutes. I'm trying to get it down as much as I can, okay? So if people have questions about that part, that's kind of where it comes from in terms of how to collect data, right? And so as a researcher, although I'm a seasoned researcher, it doesn't mean that it was any easier for me to deal with, right? So this was what was interesting. I usually start my entire process as a teacher going back to what I know. And what I know is you go, you get your you figure out what do you want them to be at the end. I'm backwards planning, right? We're going to have this project where they were going to have a life plan at the end. That was the goal, was to have some idea about what you were going to do when you get out. And I was going to have them write about it. So then I structured it backwards. Everybody with me? Right? I'm doing some good work here. Right? I'm backwards planning. I got lesson plans for each one. I got an anticipatory set, an into activity. I got an exit ticket. Right? I got all this stuff there. Right? All of them there. and so I go in, and I think the first day I had 7 young men. I go in, and I said, I introduced myself and everything. I said, okay, gentlemen, we're gonna write. We're gonna do some writing. I told them, gave them the overview of the program, and my lesson plan is kind of over here. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna do silence. I was like, okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna need you to pull out a piece of paper and we're gonna write it. So I would say I gave them a prompt. Most of them wrote like 2 lines. And I knew after that first meeting, throw them all to the side. Because this is not what I thought may happen, or what I was prepared for happening, was not working in this particular environment, right? So then in the second session, we were still trying to get to know each other. Here's what's interesting about the third session. The third session was the Monday after Trump was elected to president. And I'm going to be very real with the conversation that we had, so I don't want anyone getting offended or anything. But, so we go in, and the student said, we do a weather report. And so our weather report is, how do you feel, right? That just is a way to be able to express how you're feeling at that time. So someone may say sunny, somebody may say rainy, stormy, hurricane, whatever, right? And so they all go around, and mine were usually kind of upbeat. You know, I'm feeling blessed, I'm feeling happy, and they got to me and they said, well, Doc, they call me Doc. Doc, well, how was your weather report? And I said, it's stormy. He said, what do you mean it's stormy? I said, it's really stormy right now. I said, because from the moment that I learned that Trump won, I have been thinking about you all in this room every single day. I have thought about you. And they're like, well, why? Why are you thinking about it? I said, you know what? Y'all need to stop fucking around. I said, because if you think that this is a game, you have something else to figure out. This is no longer a game. This revolving door of you coming in and out of juvenile hall, oh no, it's over. It's over. So you can either get your stuff together and stay out of here and break that cycle, or you're going to be under the jail. You're going to be under the prison. 17, don't be surprised if the age changes from 18 to 17. Don't be surprised if more 17 and 16-year-olds are going to be tried as adults. Don't be shocked at all. And when you go, you're gone. You're staying gone. And this was the first time, and I wasn't trying to like do any teacher, educator piece. I wasn't trying to make connections with the student. I was speaking from the heart. But what then ended up happening was that they began to speak from the heart. They then began to ask questions. They then began to try to understand, well, what do you mean? Well, what's going to happen with the law and the policy? They began to say, well, you know what? I feel this way. I feel that way. And we just had a whole conversation of just us sitting and talking, which was a turning point in the program. The next day, the next class session, I said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do goal setting. We're going to do goal setting. No one had ever set goals in that room. They had never done any kind of simple goal setting strategy or activity. Okay? So I said, as I go through it, I'm thinking about the kids. So, right? So we had short term, so we had long term. We started with long term, midterm, and went backwards to short term. Everyone with me on that? Right? So they had this big goal, but then they had to learn how to walk backwards to get to, well, what do you need to start doing today? Right? So we had Ike said, break the cycle, get out, stay clean. Al, all he wanted to do was get a job and an apartment. That was it. He was like, Doc, I'll be cool. Right? Chris, he wanted a degree. And then finally Corey, and this was a challenge. Corey just wanted to win an Oscar. I said, well, Corey, what do you have to do to win an Oscar? He said, well, you got to make films. I said, okay, well, if you make film, that's cool, Corey, but how many films have you made, Corey? Yeah, Doc, I ain't made no film. Oh, okay, Corey. Well, you've done some videos, right? Like you've done some short YouTube. You got a YouTube channel? Nah, Doc, I don't have a YouTube channel. I said, have you made a video? Nah. I just want to win an Oscar. All right, well, Corey, let's start at ground zero. Let's read a little bit about what filmmakers do and how you become a filmmaker, right? Is everyone with me? Right? Just very, very basic step by step. But Ike was the one that intrigued me. Because Ike came in, he was not one of the original 7. Ike came in to class in a wheelchair. Because he had been shot right before he came in. That's actually how he got caught, right? So he comes in, and he, got the tattoo tier, tatted up, right? And from my understanding, he is a big guy in the streets, right? And remember, I need to say this part. This is the maximum security units. The older ones were 16, 17, and 18. I didn't work with them. I worked with 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. The youngest was 11 that I saw, right? For murder, killings, shootings, drugs, cross lines, and right, all these different things. But Ike said, Ike was not really engaged. He was watching, but he wasn't really participating. And then Ike said, he said, I need to break the cycle. I said, Ike, well, what are you talking about? What do you mean? He said, my grandfather is in for life. My dad is in for another 15 years. He said, and I have a son. It was, I think, at the time, 6-month-old son. He's like, and once I leave here, I got another 5. And then he just started kind of mumbling and talking to himself, whispering, I gotta break the cycle. I gotta break the cycle. Right? So part of what this activity allowed the students to do, along with, was understanding that day one, they needed to still go back to these 6 principles. Right? Which completely tied in with the Rites of Passage program. They needed to continue to define what accountability was for them, what commitment was for them, what was self-awareness. They had to go back to those principles, right? And so when we look at the significance of this, because how can I say this? I'll say it this way. The probation department was wondering how a writing program could help. Like, what could a writing program do? And one of the supervisors sat in on 2 of the sessions. And she's the one that ended up saying that in this space, kids can slow down. And slow down was, you're not walking around worried about if you're getting shamed. You're not walking around trying to fight. You're not walking around grilling, trying to put on this facade when you're really hurt inside. Right? That for 90 minutes, they could sit down, slow down, and become reflective about why they were there, what did they need to do to change, and what were they going to do when they get out. The students were allowed to dream. They were allowed to dream, and they were challenged to think. One of the students said, point blank, he was like, hey, Doc, I used to like doing this kind of stuff. I liked school. I liked being able to have conversations and think and do the work. He was like, because I was smart. Right? He had an identity piece. Part of his identity was being smart. Part of his identity was being a student. But because of family circumstances and social circumstances, he made decisions that landed him in juvenile hall. Right? They were building their literacy skills. They all said on the last day, I've never written this much. Right? And they were getting to the point to where they were enjoying it. They were looking forward to it. One of the guards said that over half of them were walking around with their journals and didn't ever let them go. So now this course prompted them to just start putting down their thoughts and their ideas, right? Using it as a way of therapy and healing. And that students were beginning or continuing to begin or being reminded the value of an education. Right? So the program, in that sense, was, I believe, a success. As a researcher, and this part is pretty new, as a researcher, I was explaining this project to one of my colleagues, Karina Jackson from NCTE. And as I'm explaining this whole thing to her, she kept interrupting me, right? And the only thing she kept saying was, are you writing about it? Did you write that? Did you write that? And I'm like, what are you talking about? I was like, this is not about me, this is about the kids. And she said, Jamal, the things that you're sharing are what researchers need to know and what researchers need to think about. So very quickly, as I explained, I went in with a kind of a traditional teacher model, right? Knowing that, and being someone who talks about culture relevant pedagogy, right? Who talks about making connections with students, who talks about using previous knowledge and prior experiences to be able to connect with students. But here's the point. In juvenile hall, I can't really ask you what you did to be here. Y'all with me? Like, that could be a place for us to start, right? Let me start this over. If we're in a school and you're brand new, I'm going to have conversations with you about what do you like, where do you go? I'm going to have those kind of personal conversations just to get to know more about you. If this student is a murderer, he can't really talk about that. He's not going to talk about that. One, he's not going to talk about that because anything he says might incriminate him. Even more than where he is now. That may be an emotional piece that he's not ready to be able to talk about. Maybe every time he talks about whatever reason why he's in there, gets him mad and gets him angry. So what I would normally do in a traditional classroom, I'm not able to do in this particular environment, right? So I had to learn what the landscape was. When we went to adjusting the curriculum, then we were able, and it kind of happened organically, that's when we began to have movement, right? That third session I was talking about, the week after Trump was voted in, that's when we began, and the curriculum, the theme stayed the same, but the type of instruction was organic and kind of very spontaneous. The healing circles, as part of the program, we had to go to a couple of healing circles. And in these healing circles, they would ask, who mentored you? Why did you become a mentor? And so I'll share this piece, and this is part of what Karina was talking about. One of the questions was something about name a time when you needed a mentor. And I said, oh, and I was talking about childhood. And I said, I remember being about 7 years old, and all of the young men in the neighborhood, we all took karate. We took taekwondo. And what we would do on Saturdays is you might play sports, we might go play baseball, basketball, football, but this particular afternoon we were sparring. So does anyone know what sparring is? We're fighting. we're fighting, right? So people are in a circle, right? And then, it's kind of like, okay, you and you. And then the winner, okay, you and you, right? And it first started, just in the air. Then it went to, tapping on the body. Next thing you know, it's a full battle royal on somebody's front yard, right? And so literally, and I was one of the younger ones. So they, so it was like either I would go with the younger one or I would go with the one that was smaller. So this particular day, it was the two of us. They said, okay, go, spar. We get in, bam. He gets the best of me. Okay, he got me in the job. All right, bam. I was off this day. Third time, boom. Right? I go to the ground, I get up, I go home. I'm like, man, I'm getting whooped. I'm going home, right? I go home, and I come in the door. My dad is watching TV, and he looked, and then looked back. He said, well, what happened? I said, oh, nothing. He said, no, what happened? I said, well, I was outside, and I explained what happened. And my father continued to talk to me, and we walked. We're walking around the living room, and we walk. And I look up, and I realize I'm back outside. And so my father said, well, what you're going to do is you're going to go back, and you're going to whoop his ass. And if you don't, I'm whooping yours. And he politely, he didn't slam it, he just closed the door. Dad or kid? Dad or kid? I'm going back to this kid, right? Needless to say, go back in that situation, right? Same situation, same guy. I get the better of him, right? But it was in that moment that I had a lot of different feelings. In that moment, I felt lonely. I felt lonely because I felt like, okay, this is symbolic of what I'm going to have to do for the rest of my life. Is fight and be able to defend myself and protect myself. Is everyone kind of with me? I see some, right? In that moment, that's what I realized about being who I was, young, black, African-American male from East Oak. Like, this is how I'm going to have to go through life. What I also realized was that was a feeling of loneliness, feeling like my dad left me out there, right? Feeling like, wow, okay, maybe I don't have anybody else to depend on. And I only have me, right? And as I'm talking in this healing circle, I realize I'm getting choked up, but there's not a dry eye there's not a dry eye around, because what I realized in the healing circle was that I'm more like these young men than I may have even thought about, right? Because when these young men are doing these things, what are they doing? They want acceptance. They want approval. They want a family. They want someone to embrace them. They want someone to be proud of them. Are you all with me? Right? Now, the way that they show it, the way that they're trying to get it, may not be what society says is the way to do it. But by golly, I think most of us can attest and relate to those feelings, those desires, those wants, right? And so this whole thing about humanizing research, that as researchers, we also have to be able to look at our reflective notes, to look at our memos, and to be able to say, what did I learn about just being, not only being a researcher, but being a human being? Like, how did this research impact me? And is it going to make me do anything differently once I'm done with this research, right? Because we've already talked about, we know that research will sit, well, now it doesn't sit on the shelf. It may be on the internet a little bit, right? But, right, research sometimes will just stay stagnant. It may not move, right? But the way that you are changed will impact the next study you do, the next research you do, the next participant pool that you work with, the next community that you're trying to change, and that, in and of itself, that process can help other researchers learn from that as well. So, finally, the implications. The school-to-prison pipeline is a social problem and a civil rights issue. We all have to start taking a stab at trying to deconstruct the school-to-prison pipeline. It's the process of building literacy skills that will develop critical consciousness, right? Being able to read the world, which I would argue that many of these young men already know how to read the world. They just have to read more in different kinds of genres to be able to be successful to go between different discourse communities. And as educators, we must learn insights about how to improve instruction in the classrooms to keep them in school. School should not be a negative feeling. School should not be a place that they don't want to come. School should be a place that they run to, that they feel safe at, and that they want to be at. And that the families are also feeling invited to come and be supportive and collaborate with the educators on campus. Thank you. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when you talked about the research and reflections, and you talked about humanizing research, it made me think about what if you or have your research looked into if a woman was in doing what you were doing? Like, have you looked into, like, during a literature review or anything, did you look into where women were dealing with such, like, in that environment? Because I know so many women who want to go into corrections where they're saying, I don't want to work with women, I want to work with men. So it's like, how did you look into anything of that, and how was
I did not look at the gender differences.
Okay.
Specifically because I was more interested in the class piece and the race piece. Because not all, but I would say most of them are brown and black. Yep, most of them that I was working with were brown and black. And so, and that's what I thought going in. There was a large number of Filipino young men that were coming in. You also have to remember too that because their stay is so short, sometimes some of them stay a week or two. Like there were kids that I saw in class and then never saw again, right? But there were also students that had been there, young people that had been there for 1 year, 2 years. I think one of the longest ones that I saw had been there the longest was like two years, 2 months or something like that. So I wasn't looking at the gender piece, but that is definitely something down the line that I'm interested in. Yes, ma'am.
I think that the problem is not just in the juvenile students or that you were talking about. It's a problem that I have seen throughout all the schools that I've been subbing. And students at the middle school and the high school, they don't seem interested in education.
Yeah.
What all they are interested in is just texting or watching, listening to music, doing rap, something like that. So I think this problem also should be addressed in schools, in normal schools, not only just
Oh, absolutely.
as a juvenile.
Absolutely. And so at San Francisco State, I teach the mandatory reading across content areas course, or literacy across content areas course. And so one of the things I talk about a lot is, which I alluded to earlier, is this notion of you have to give them something and give them a reason to be there, right? It shouldn't be, you should listen to me and do what I tell you to do because I'm the teacher. If you come in with that attitude, you're done. You might as well go do another job. Don't teach. If you're not interested in making connections with students, if you're not interested in trying to better understand how you can actually change lives and positively impact lives, you don't need to be a teacher. So I think when it comes to this notion of that they only want to text, or they're only interested in popular culture, whatever those things may be, I believe, since this is a collaboration, we want to learn as much from them, in essence, that they're learning from us. So I think we have to kind of meet them. I may not say halfway, but we got to do some things, I think, to keep them engaged into the classroom.
Could you please say, if you have questions, to leave them in the feed, the Facebook Live comments? Could you just say that to the...
Oh, if you have questions, please leave them in the live feed on Facebook Live. And then I can just look at it, or
We'll give it to you.
you'll give it to me. Okay.
questions?
Okay. Yes.
Yes, and I left mine with live feed actually already, but.
I mean, this is my first one, man. I'm catching up.
These are not really questions, these are comments, but I love your response nonetheless. And I'm going to go backwards first. In your second bullet in the implications, when you were talking about reading the world, and you framed it as, yes, right there, and you said some interesting things, and it sounded like you were saying them spontaneously, and I'm going to encourage you to capture them into writing like Karina was doing, in this whole notion of them reading the world already, but needing to read more widely and read in different worldly genres. I just like the way that was framed. Moving backward, I thought one of the most interesting things in your presentation was the pivotal moment, because that's been such an intense moment for so many around the world, in micro and macro, chrono context. And so it's really important to surface how it's impacting our data collection, our instruction, our classroom management, and what have you. So I thought it was interesting anyway, but when that moment popped, that was a really interesting moment in your narrative.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think the other piece, and I don't think I may have skipped over this, that we had conversations about if you have a felony, can you get a job? And then what kind of jobs can you get and what jobs can you not get? And we were even saying that maybe under this, it was coming out that even under this new administration, would some of those jobs that you can get now get even smaller? Like would that list get even smaller? Would it get cut in half? Right? And then their questions were, so, but then what? If I'm already limited to this, and then that gets even shorter or gets smaller, then what am I going to do? Right? And so I do know that there are some programs that are in the beginning stages that are looking, some cities, some counties are looking to work with their juvenile justice systems to then work with community-based organizations to build skills, trades. I think there's some federal funding that's coming down or was coming down, that people may have applied for, that is still kind of in the hopper of if you're in juvenile hall, then can we train you to be an electrician? Can we train you to do construction? Can we train you to be a surveyor and those kinds of jobs? And then be able to plug you in kind of job placement piece. But I think there has to be a lot more of that, especially for the young men and women that have felonies. Yes.
I love this model. I had worked previously with juveniles, incarcerated juveniles as well. Currently, I'm interested in the adult incarcerated population. So how would you, if you were using this model for that population, would there be any changes that you would make?
It's a good question. I don't know exactly what they would be, but I'll just kind of throw out things that I think I would have to consider. I think you have to consider with adults, they have many more lived experiences than the adolescents, right, than the youth. So the way that I'm dealing with this 13 or 14-year-old who this may be their first or second time, some of them it was 6 or 7 times in the hall, the way I choose to deal with them in terms of being reflective and those pieces, I think it's not easier. I think it's an appropriate way to be able to unpack where they are and what they're doing through this kind of a writing program. It would seem to me that because these adults, maybe 20, 30, 40, right, they have these layers of pain, these layers of experiences, these layers of maybe even negative experiences with school or academics or education and the jadedness that they may have. That's just going to take a lot longer, right? So not that I don't think it can be useful, I just think that I think you have to go a little slower kind of over here because there's so much more to unpack. If that's a direct answer. Other questions? I said earlier that I was a professor and that I was also involved in the community. And as a coach, I've had a number of young people who have come through our program from age group all the way through high school. And I am overjoyed whenever I'm able to see them in a college setting. And one of my former students, Kristen Robinson, walked into support today, who ran on CA Track Club, graduated from Skyline, and is here on the track team, and graduating soon. Graduating soon, so it's good to see you. And so it's students like her that make me continue to do work like this, because I know that it does turn out something positive at the end.
So I want to thank Jamal for visiting with us today. What an incredible and important topic. I think clearly we as academics need to engage in this conversation. This is one of those critical, most vulnerable populations. I also think it's really a tribute to your work and your commitment that one of your students is here at Sac State and came to see you.
And even came to say hi.
And also thanks to you watching live around the world on Facebook Live and in perpetuity on YouTube. We look forward to any questions or comments. You can reach out to Dr. Cooks at San Francisco State University. His email is jamalc@sfsu.edu. So thanks again for joining us for the Sacramento State Doctorate in Educational Leadership Brown Bag Series. And I think this concludes our series for this year. Is that correct? Yes, this concludes our series for this year. So we'll see you again in the fall of 2017 as we begin these critical conversations anew. Thank you.